and beyond the government. Non-governmental agencies such as ACTAF, the Association of Cuban Agricultural and Forestry Workers, are active participants in training and support.
Debemos decir que realmente un gran % de los productores no tenían ninguna formación agronómica, la cual han ido tomando en la medida que se ha fortalecido este sistema de agricultura urbana en los 13 años que ya lleva, o más de 13 años que ya lleva de creada, ¿no? Y producen sus alimentos, garantizan alimentos a su familia, garantizan alimentos para el consumo social, que es una tarea primordial también que tiene cada una de estas unidades, y garantizan alimentos a la comunidad.
These organizations are also able to interact with international aid agencies, bringing much needed financing and external know-how to the Cuban effort. On this trip, Jacinda Fairholm is helping 2 new interns get settled. They are placed with ACTAF, and Idalmis Nazco will guide their stay in Cuba. This is yet another way in which cross-fertilization of ideas and mutual support take place.
Life Cycles had a history of working in Canada in food production and in educating people about how to produce food. And in the late 1990s, we became aware that Cuba had employed really innovative and ingenious techniques to deal with the food crisis that happened in the early 90s. So we started working with them to build a demonstration site, which is what this site here is. And it is a site that has both practical elements and also training elements. There's a couple of classrooms that Life Cycles has helped provide the finances for through the Canadian International Development Agency, so that there could be both a training and a practical element.
While all these measures have successfully resulted in a huge increase in the amount of food available, the question of getting this food from the gardens to the table required major changes to the old socialist system of government market controls. From a strict system of rationing in government stores, Cuba now permits a wide variety of demand-driven markets.
Definitely food prices are a remaining problem for the majority of the Cuban population. Before the crisis, most of the food needs of a family for an entire month would be covered under a ration card system in special ration shops at a very low price. Very, very low, almost symbolic. With the economic crisis, the government no longer has the ability to provide a whole month's food to every person in the country every month. So now the ration card probably provides the average person or the average family with a little bit less than 2 weeks of food every month, and the rest has to be bought in various kinds of new open market, free market settings.
There are other sectors of society whose food security also needs to be covered. Prior to the crisis, the government assumed responsibility for all citizens' consumption. With this liberalization, a new system of providing food to those in need was introduced. This system was directly linked to other changes, allowing private control of land and private markets.
Each urban farmer or gardener has an arrangement with a local either daycare center for children or a local school or a local retirement home for older people or a local clinic where they provide a certain amount of their fresh organic fruits and vegetables every day at a much lower price as a community service.
Cuando le llegaban ya los productos a las escuelas y a los círculos y eso, ya llegaban muy maltratados y eso. Entonces, tener nosotros los huertos estos así que eran más frescos los vegetales, nos plantearon esa tarea y entonces nosotros hasta el momento hemos cumplido con el plan que nos plantearon a nosotros hemos cumplido con el círculo que tenemos. Este se entrega 2 veces a la semana.
2 veces por semana, a razón de 8 libras per cápita por niño.
The ministries of health and education have shown that the change in children's diets to include fresh organic fruits and vegetables every day has already had a measurable health impact. Researchers also expect that these changes to dietary behavior will lead to better lifelong health and a reduction in diet-related diseases, such as cancer and diabetes. While the urban organic gardening movement was a clear response to hunger, it has also generated other benefits. It is not just the young that are changing their way of eating, but Cubans of all ages are improving their traditional diets with resulting health benefits.
Pienso que Cuba es uno de los pocos países donde en casi todo el país se puede tener acceso a vegetales sin contaminantes, sin plaguicidas, sin fertilizantes, es decir, el consumo de vegetales sano.
Pues realmente la ciudad no tenía una cultura culinaria desde el punto de vista del consumo de los vegetales. Pues anteriormente, bueno, se importaban de otras provincias, no venían con el aspecto adecuado, con la presencia, y no gustaba realmente.
In contrast, people now are lining up at neighborhood kiosks on a daily basis to buy whatever is available.
Aquí había un hábito de consumir lechuga a fin de año, era una tradición, tomate cuando venía el pico de cosecha, quizás en el verano, algún pepino, no mucho tampoco. Y le puedo decir que ya todo lo que se produzca se vende. O se vende directamente en los puntos de venta o se aporta al consumo social, o sea, para abastecer hospitales, círculos infantiles.
Este punto de venta es magnífico. Lo que la lechuga no dura todo el año, dura mediados, fines de año nada más. ¿Cuánto los precios y eso? No, los precios aquí son baratos.
Creo que una de las ideas más grandes que ha visto en Cuba ha sido esto, los gallos.
Beyond its health benefits, the Green Revolution has also had an impact on employment, community development, and above all, a huge effect on the environment.
Well, I think urban agriculture in Cuba has proven to have a number of very positive social impacts. Number one, producing food during a food shortage and enabling people to eat and to not suffer a shortage of food. Number two, to generate jobs. The estimate is that almost 400,000 jobs have been generated in Cuban cities. This is during an economic crisis which was generating unemployment. And there are very interesting statistics that show in each one of the major cities and provinces of Cuba, as urban agriculture has grown, unemployment has dropped.
The community impact of this employment has also been significant as people work in their local communities to improve the economy and environment in which they live.
Porque ¿quiénes trabajan en esas unidades? Pues en esas unidades trabajan las mujeres y los hombres que tenemos viviendo allí en ese barrio o en esa calle. Entonces es una fuente de trabajo, es una reanimación económica que la agricultura urbana con sus unidades de producción ha venido creando en cada una de las microlocalidades donde iban siendo ubicadas estas unidades de producción.
Yo diría que uno de los más importantes está en haber dado empleo a más de 300.000 personas y tener más de 71.000 mujeres en movimiento.
Many professionals have joined the ranks of urban gardeners, leaving behind their careers for the higher pay and convenience of working closer to home. People who had essentially been displaced from their work with the transportation crisis have found great relief and improved quality of life by working in their neighborhood gardens. In addition, a huge difference for people like America and her family has been the opportunity to be self-employed. Previous to the crisis, virtually all salaries were state-controlled, and there was little or no room for entrepreneurship. With the liberalization, urban gardeners often earn more per month than doctors or other professionals, and they have a new sense of control over their working lives. Urban agriculture has attracted many others as well. Retirees, housewives, and the young have all found a new sense of purpose. Migrants from the countryside recuperate with pride the knowledge of their forefathers.
Ver crecer lo que tú con tus manos has cuidado y has hecho, hace que tú le cojas cariño y te enamores de lo que tú haces, porque lo procreas con tus manos.
And so many of the retired people say that now they feel útil. Maybe they're, had a professional life and then were then retired, or even if they, women that maybe were housewives, suddenly to be able to go outside, be in green spaces, work with plants, make their own living, support their family, both directly with food crops, but those who sell also to have an income source for their family.
One such example is that of Juan and his wife, who have reinvented themselves yet again in a long and eventful life. From his youthful days as a guerrilla fighter under the command of Che Guevara, Juan has embraced the many ups and downs of the revolution. He still can't seem to retire and has become completely caught up in his new role as community gardener in a dense apartment complex of Havana. Along with his friend and neighbor, they love feeding their families with the produce from the plot beside their apartment building, and the extra income is more than welcome.
Hay otra vida en la calle, en el barrio. Otra vida no solamente desde el punto económico, desde el punto de vista económico, sino desde el punto de vista social. La gente que vive allí siente el impacto directo, cómo se ha realzado su barrio, cómo ya es otra cosa, cómo ya no es solamente el grupo de vivienda que allí tenemos, ya tenemos algo que ha despertado el interés a la sociedad por ir a visitar esos lugares. Es decir, la mejora en la alimentación, la mejora en la salud, la mejora en el salario, en la vida económica, en la reanimación económica y en la reanimación social.
This renewal includes a major improvement in urban environments, increased green space, a significant reduction in abandoned lots, and the return to the cities of birds and insects.
So there's been a tremendous transformation in terms of green space, open space, a tremendous increase in urban plant population. So they've increased shade, which increases also habitat for birds, bees, butterflies, and the improvements to the urban environment are significant through urban greening and urban gardening.
Cuba is overwhelmingly urban, with 76% of the population living in cities. In a matter of less than a decade, through a combination of scientific expertise and institutional will, this green revolution has averted a major hunger crisis. At the same time, it has improved health and environmental stewardship. From its humble beginnings in the early 1990s, when only about 5,000 tons of food was produced annually in urban settings, within 10 years, this effort increased production to over 5 million tons per year. This represents over half the fruit and vegetables consumed by the entire country. Cuba has developed a new definition of food security based on self-reliance, local production, and the extensive participation of its population.
Hay que decir que en la inmensa mayoría de nuestras ciudades la población era muy pasiva desde el punto de vista de adquisición de los productos para la alimentación. Hoy es todo distinto. Hoy la propia población es muy activa para la adquisición de estos productos porque participa también en su producción.
Before, when farmers were only off in remote rural areas and you never saw a farmer, like in most countries in the world for urban people, you take food for granted. But all of a sudden, when your neighbor is a farmer and is producing wonderful, fresh, organic food, and you're watching that process as you walk down the street every day, it really has a psychological change and a much greater respect for farming. And I think that's a big, important social impact as well.
While this experiment seems to be working for the moment, many ask the question whether it can survive impending political change or the eventual lifting of the U.S. embargo. Generally, most people on the street concur that urban organic farming is the way to go.
Cabría que usted me preguntara, ¿y usted cree que en esas circunstancias se mantenga la agricultura urbana? Y yo mismo diría que sí, vino para quedarse. Fue impulsada tal vez por esa necesidad, pero ya es un sistema, ya hay capacitados productores. No entra en contradicción con la agricultura convencional de gran escala, se complementa con ella.
But is this experience of any relevance outside the unique circumstances of Cuba?
Well, I think many countries around the world, or many movements within countries around the world, see Cuba in terms of ecological farming as a lighthouse, as an example that can show the way towards a more sustainable agriculture. So, for example, I'm here with an international research group right now. We're researching these changes in Cuba, and in our group we have people from countries as diverse as Venezuela, Ireland, Dominican Republic, Mexico, Mozambique, Korea, United States, and all from these very different countries that are all very different from Cuba. They don't feel that they could maybe copy exactly what Cuba does, but they can learn important lessons that can be very useful to other countries that are facing many different problems in the food system, whether it's pesticide contamination or unhealthy food, that Cuba shows a lot of lessons in terms of thinking out ways to change the food system in other countries.
Tenemos el deber de colaborar con países hermanos que tengan interés de implementar estas tecnologías. Básicamente en aportar asesores. Creo que el conocimiento es lo más importante, transferir conocimiento, transferir tecnología.
The fact that Cuba, under all the difficulties that it's had, and particularly related to the blockade and recent historical events, that Cuba has been fairly isolated. But that a country with relatively limited resources, a poor country, is able to meet the challenge of feeding the population and to start building up a lot of capacity in that way, because we've seen major advances in agriculture in Cuba in the past few decades. It's very impressive, and do it in a way that is, the organizational models it's based on cooperatives, for the most part, really extensive system of cooperatives in the country, and the kind of control and participation that entails.
It's so radically different from what we have here that you can't compare the two, but you know, they've made it through the end of the age of oil. That's the Cuban experience, is when they were denied all their relationships with the Soviet Union, then everything dried up, literally. And now they've gone to animal traction, it's all vermicomposting, it's all more nutritious, it's all organically grown.
I think the uniqueness of the Cuban experience is that essentially it's a whole country feeding itself, or mostly feeding itself, using ecological farming. In most other countries in the world, there are some farmers who farm ecologically, but it's not the majority. So this is an important example in this sort of debate around the world of, can ecological farming or can organic farming really feed a whole country? Cuba shows that it more or less can, and it can do it better than before, because Cuba actually produces more food now with the ecological farming than it did before with the chemical farming.
Cuba's green revolution has shown that there are many viable options and paths. For the Venturellis and others, who dream of providing safe and healthy food for themselves, their families, and their communities.